Hey, it's Drybear, back with another Diablo 4 build guide, and today we're going to be talking about my Tornado build for Druid. This build has some of the highest DPS potential of any Druid build in the game, but has the inherent weaknesses of Wind Tornado magic in that it is sometimes random and also has its damage done a little bit more delayed than some of the other builds. Some people may not like the RNG of the tornadoes at the beginning, but note that there are legendary unlocks later that allow us to control and direct our tornadoes so that DPS high output is accessible. But first, you should come hang out on my live stream. I'm live every single day. If you don't come hang out with me and the community, then on your way to work, a new bakery is gonna open and it's gonna smell really good. But every time you drive by it, you won't know exactly where it is. You'll just know the smell and won't be able to savor the taste. Let's talk about the build. Your builder is gonna be your Wind Shear. This is probably one of the most flexible builders of any class in the game. It is highly flexible, high range, good attack speed, and builds great passive resource. And we have some other additives that we can put onto it, like making targets vulnerable with a chance, and additional spirit if it penetrates and hits additional targets. There are some modifiers, some legendaries that we can get as well that give Wind Shear a lucky hit chance to give us full spirit. So there are some builds that will take advantage of that, though until you get lucky hit on your full setup of a reasonable proc chance, it may not be as valuable, but later on it can be pretty good. No shocker here, but we're gonna pick up Tornado. This, while leveling, it's actually insane DPS against bosses. It can just be somewhat inconsistent against elites and packs of mobs because of the way tornadoes work unmodified. They just fly around, and sometimes it can take all your spirit away and do little to no damage. So it's pretty good, but you do want to pick this up for this build as it scales better and better as your gear gets better and better. For modifiers, we like the free one that we get that you have to get where you have a chance to spawn an additional tornado. This one is free and does gain the benefits of the modifiers the tornado already has. So you can actually shoot out 2 tornadoes at once, which is a huge proc of damage initially, especially on large hitbox targets. And then enemies have a chance to become vulnerable. You'll see a theme of this throughout the build because we'll get some benefits from hitting vulnerable targets. Plus, it is also a damage amp, which is great when you have high uptime damage like we do with wind magic. Obligatory note on the builder spender passives in the core tree for Druid. These are actually great for almost every build. It increases your maximum spirit, it gives you more spirit generation, and causes your core spells or any abilities in the core tree to cost more spirit but deal more damage. In most builds, you'll find some level of these. You probably don't want to pick these passives up while you're leveling, but as you get closer to 50, you do want to put points in these. These work great, especially in this build. Next, we pick up Cyclone Armor, which is a excellent defensive. It is storm and nature magic, which helps us in our build. It has a knockback on it with some damage as well, and you can modify it to not only give you non-physical damage reduction, there's a legendary that allows it to give magical or physical damage reduction as well. So you get both magical and physical, and it does some decent damage. It also knocks back and slows targets that can be CC'd, which is excellent for some of our storm procs later on. And you can also knock back enemies and make them vulnerable, which gives us even more storm procs. Now we're gonna have an option for an ability here that actually has pretty equal efficacy depending on your personal preference. There isn't a 6th ability that fits perfectly in this build. I can recommend Boulder. Ravens is also really good. You can even get Blood Howl for extra spirit generation and self-healing. Tons of these options work. If you want pure damage, I think Ravens is great because not only does it give you more damage output and constant damage from the Ravens, you can also apply Vulnerable whenever you want, which is great for our key passive, which procs off Vulnerable. You can also run Boulder for knockback and a potential to mobilize or stun, extra earth damage. It allows you to run the passive in the ultimate tree that makes it so that after casting earth, your storm does more, which can make your next tornado do a good amount of damage. But just know that slot is variable. In the Wrath tree, we're going to want some of the storm effects here. Some of these are lightning based, and you'll see that in my Lightning Storm Eye of the Storm build for Druid. But for these, there are some that are pretty useful. If you do end up running Lucky Hit, which I think towards endgame you probably will want to, not only will Lucky Hit help you with your Wind Shear procs, but also allow you a chance with any storm skill dealing damage to make enemies vulnerable, which will proc our key passive, which is pretty useful. And since we're running both Cataclysm and Hurricane in this build, running Endless Tempest is great. It gives you just pure damage increase because those durations last longer, and it can apply more CC and higher chance to proc vulnerable. Another great option here. So both these passives are awesome. Our core Wrath ability is Hurricane. This one gives us a ton of extra damage. It's great for CCing large crowds when you're doing dungeons and clearing trash mobs. Enemies inside of it are slowed, and they also have a chance to become vulnerable. every time they're in Hurricane. And there's even a legendary we can get, which can increase the damage of Hurricane done, which is great and makes it actually do pretty respectable damage to bosses as well. So when we get those modifiers and we scale up Hurricane, along with the passive that increases the duration, this gives us constant proccing of vulnerability. And again, you can run Boulder. If you don't want Ravens or Bloodhowl, you can run Boulder in this build. This one's probably the most fun for leveling because Boulder has the knockback on it. It has the chance to stun if it's overpowered, has high crit chance, and does decent damage. You may not be able to pick up the dual element passive that procs bonus damage on Storm after using Earth, so you can Boulder into a Tornado, which is pretty cool. But this one I think is just fun to play with. It probably doesn't fit into the perfect endgame build, but it's an option for that 6th skill if you're looking for one. And you can also run the dual element a legendary in this. Now, you won't be able to take advantage of both of these because you have to swap back and forth to keep the buff up. But once you cast one Earth skill, you'll get crit chance of Storm skills for 4 seconds. The Boulder duration is, the cooldown on it is longer than that. It's not too much longer. It's about double depending on your gear. So you will have about 50% uptime on this crit chance buff. So Boulder as an option does give you the ability to run this legendary if you have it as available on this, though I do believe that running a different ability and having even just a defensive legendary probably fits better into this build, but it is an option if you do run Boulder. For ultimate running Cataclysm, no shocker there, pun intended. So this one is an activation. It does Storm and Lightning Strikes and spawns periodically Tornadoes. The last testing before launch, I tested this, and the tornadoes that come out of Cataclysm do benefit from the modifiers you have on your base tornado. So it will scale off of that. It is super useful and valuable. So running this with the Storm build just makes perfect sense. You can also make it so that Lightning Strikes cause vulnerability, which is awesome because of our key passive, Perfect Storm. This makes it so all Storm abilities, 5 of your abilities here are all Storm. They will grant 2 Spirit and deal 20% increased damage when damaging a vulnerable, immobilized, or slowed enemy. You can get slows off Hurricane very easily and Cyclone Armor if they're knocked back, so plenty of ways to proc that. But we also talked about through this whole build how often we're proccing Vulnerable. Vulnerable by itself is already a damage amplifier, so you get an additional damage amplifier on top of that if you're hitting a vulnerable target, and you get Spirit back, which allows you to spend for more tornadoes. So all of your abilities that are Storm are going to give you passive resource generation and increased damage and proc vulnerable, and then procking vulnerable gives you more benefits. So all this works really well together. So this full Storm build kind of takes advantage of all of that. When you put it together, especially with really good optimized gear, this thing starts to run wild. For legendaries, you will want Aspect of the Tempest. This increases the damage done by Hurricane for every second that it's active. Our modifiers that increase the duration of Hurricane make this damage modifier even stronger. So this legendary is awesome for this build. I tested Aspect of the Umbral a little bit and actually proved to be quite valuable because slow does count as a crowd control in this category. So anytime you slow, immobilize, knock back, and stun, you'll be able to get some resource back. It did seem to be pretty good. Though again, for Aspect of the Umbral, for me to say that this is slam dunk, fit it in the build every time, I would want to play this over long stretches of time, not just a couple hours, so that I can really get a sense of how much resource I'm generating with Aspect of Umbral to see if it's worth it. But there was at least enough value to consider it as an option. We talked about this before, Aspect of Cyclonic Force. This makes Cyclone Armor give not only magic damage reduction, but physical damage reduction as well, and it also applies to nearby allies, which is just a bonus. This one's an easy pickup anytime you run Cyclone Armor. Aspect of the Expectant works great in this build, although I feel like if you end up getting high lucky hit chance later on, you may not be able to cast Wind Shear enough to get value out of this. You might just be proccing tornadoes more often, but this is here as an option. And I think while leveling or at a suboptimal gear set and build, you actually get excellent value out of this because you'll be casting Wind Shear enough to get good value. Obviously, 10 Wind Shears before a tornado would be maximum value, but you may not be able to store up that much. Just know that as you get your build more and more optimized, this one might actually work its way out. I think you probably need to get at least 4 to 6 casts per cast of core skill to get super value out of this compared to other legendaries. But again, at low optimization, this one is really good. Aspect of the Calm Breeze is what we've been talking about. Wind Shear has a chance based on lucky hit to fully restore your spirit. And as you get better gear, this might actually scale up. It's possible they nerf this or change this in the future, so this has a hard cap on it. like it says it does, but if you were able to scale this infinitely with Lucky Hit, you might actually be able to cast Wind Shear 1 to 3 times and then get, you know, plenty of spirit to spend, and then spend Tornado, spend Wind Shear, or build, spend, and you actually get so much spirit generation from either your passive generation or getting the Lucky Hit proc that you end up being able to cast tornadoes constantly. But this one I think is an excellent build option for this. Add to that Rapid Aspect, which gives us basic skills, gain attack speed for Wind Shear. Almost every build will use this in some way, I think, especially while leveling and sub-optimized, just because it's such a great, easy pickup that has excellent value. Edge Master's Aspect is great because you can deal bonus damage. There probably is an over-under on finding a good breakpoint on the tornadoes where you could build a full spirit and then cast, especially if you have a Lucky Hit build with the Wind Shear proc where you wait for full spirit and spend with the tornado. I feel like there's going to be more value in having multiple tornadoes running, especially with our key passive that works off vulnerable procs. So this one might not fit into the build, but it could end up being just, if you parse it out, it ends up being a damage regardless, because it does scale based on how much spirit you have in the build. So this one is something to think about. And if you get it as a drop, definitely use it, but I'm not sure yet if it's going to be in the perfect optimized tornado build at the end. Storm Chaser is the legendary power that you're going to want to get as fast as possible. This one is not in the codex, and so you won't be able to farm this by doing dungeons. You're going to have to get the drop naturally, but it is awesome because it makes it so that tornado will seek up to 2 targets based on whatever legendary level you have, which is really cool. But that just means that if it can, it will seek up a target, and you get actually significant DPS increase, because that means it'll follow targets around, dealing damage the whole time. And it's excellent for bosses because then all your tornadoes are now just stuck on the boss, dealing tons and tons of damage. And that's why I say this one has one of the highest DPS potentials for any druid build. Is because when you get a lot of tornadoes up, full vulnerability proc chance, and you're getting the storm damage ticking constantly, the DPS is actually bonkers. But this legendary does solve the gripe that some people have with tornado, in that it is pure RNG, because you can actually make it seek targets before it gives up, which is awesome and increases the damage quite a lot. And that is the Tornado Druid build. This one is a lot of fun, and you can really get some cool DPS out of it. I'm excited to play it. I may end up playing this even while leveling, or maybe in just Storm Companion variation of this one for leveling, just because it's so much fun. So if you got value out of the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment as well, and come hang out on my live stream. Or don't. I don't control what you do. You live your own life. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content. Link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.